Joining us with reaction, Fox News contributor. She's breaking news tonight again. Sara, former U.S. attorney, National Review contributing editor. He has been amazing in his writing, on top of his game. Andrew McCarthy, and the author of the upcoming book. I love the title, The Russian Hoax. He'll tell you the rest. Fox News legal analyst Gregg, Jarrett. Andy, let me start with you. I'm actually on radio all day today. I called it a crossfire hurricane edition of the Sean Hannity radio show, and I'm going to be playing that music in a minute. But you actually wrote the same thing today, and I want you to go into what the Times was doing, the New York Times specifically, in their coverage yesterday, and why they're trying to get ahead of this.
Well, I think, Sean, what they're burying, the word that you almost never see in the whole article, is counterintelligence. And the reason is the scandal here is that they had a case in which they didn't have a criminal predicate, and they didn't even really have the predicate you would need to invoke national security powers to conduct this kind of an investigation. And they used their counterintelligence powers to conduct not only an investigation on American citizens, but it was the incumbent Democratic administration employing these extraordinary tactics that are meant to protect America against foreign enemies, and they employed them against their political adversaries in the Trump campaign. That's the story.
Yeah, and as you said in your piece, rightly so, they buried the lead. I did give you attribution, by the way, because it was a good line. Let me go to Sara. Sara, this is interesting. You now have gotten at least some feedback on what we can expect from Michael Horowitz's report, but I want to add to that. Now we know that the actors that were investigated now will weigh in on it. Does that mean they can use phony redactions? Does that mean that they can add or try to get the Inspector General to change what he wrote?
Well, they can certainly respond. This is current officials and former officials, both from the FBI and the DOJ. And what they're going to do is take a look at this report. And remember, nobody has seen this, but the people that the Inspector General has given it to, both at the FBI and the DOJ, these current and former officials, and people within Congress, which I have been told had to sign non-disclosure agreements so that they wouldn't release any of the information before the people in the report had a time to respond. So what will happen is they will respond to that. That'll be attached to the report. And whether or not there's redactions or conversations with Horowitz before that report's released, that will happen. We don't know yet what will be. That's right. That's right. And one of the things, Sean, that I think they're going to be looking at as well is the scope of the Hillary Clinton investigation. This is the full scope of the Bureau's investigation. So this is, like you said, millions of documents, over a year of investigation into this. And it'll take about 3 to 4 weeks, I'm told, before it will be made public.
And then the 1.2 million documents should follow. We should have access to those unless they deal with national security. I thought buried in the Times report, too, was an interesting point, Gregg, Jarrett, that if they got permission to interview these Australian diplomat, and that had to go through the State Department, no? Wouldn't that have been known from the very beginning by the Kerry State Department and probably the president himself?
Well, the answer is likely yes, but we don't know because they've been so secretive about everything, and the FBI and the Department of Justice has been covering up everything. But look, the use of this confidential informant by Comey and his minions at the FBI should erase any doubt that Americans have that this is an agency of the government that abused its power in an attempt to frame Donald Trump and destroy him. They were trying to entrap people in the Trump campaign to say something incriminating, and of course they were never charged with collusion, so they said nothing of the sort.
Collusion is not a crime.
No,
right?
it's not.
That's all the irony here. Andy, I know that you've been doing great, right? Am I wrong in Hillary Clinton committed crimes that they exonerated before investigating, so it seems like it was rigged? Then you lead to the phony dossier. Then you lead to a spy in the campaign. Then you lead to the FISA courts being lied to for an entire year with unverified, uncorroborated, and they never, by omission, they lied by not telling that Hillary paid for it. Is anything in those statements I'm saying that are wrong, sir?
No, I don't think so, Sean. I think, you know, this is such a expansive, complicated story that you always need a hook that people can sort of wrap their brain around to understand it. And the only hook that I keep coming back to is that there's no objective person of good faith left or right, whatever your ideology, whatever your party, who could look at these two investigations and say that equal justice was done in both. It's simply not possible. And what happened here is they bent over backwards to not make the case against Mrs. Clinton, and then they scorched the earth to invent the case against Donald Trump.
That's the name of, by the way, that's the name of Gregg's book. That's it in a nutshell. Andy, great work. Welcome aboard, by the way. And we look forward to you being our colleague. We appreciate you being with us. These new text messages, collusion, delusion, new documents show Obama officials and the FBI coordinated in the anti-Trump probe.
The DOJ and the FBI have not been forthright with the information. I think this information is explosive. Why? Because it shows that even when Brennan briefed Terry Reid, went to meet with him in the Gang of Eight, that was in August 2016, that early that month, at the beginning of August, we know that Jonathan Moffa, who was working with the counterintelligence division of the FBI, working alongside Peter Strzok and was probably Peter Strzok's supervisor, according to my sources, actually went to the White House to have a meeting with Denis McDonough, who was the chief of staff for President Obama. And what's so fascinating about that is that he entered the White House early in the morning that August, goes into the White House with 3 other people who are not named on the White House logs, and then doesn't check out until like 11:59 that night. So we don't even know what time he left. But he meets with Denis McDonough, and it is apparently about this, the Russia investigation. And that puts him just 1 degree of separation from the president, because Denis McDonough is his chief of staff. So President Obama was very well aware, according to the sources that I've spoken with, at least they believe he was very well aware of what was going on in the beginnings of this investigation.
There was coordination between Loretta Lynch's DOJ and the FBI. How do you know?
Well, I mean, we know because we have a number of documents, a growing body of evidence, Brian, that now would suggest that Director Comey, who under sworn testimony a number of times have said there was no coordination between Loretta Lynch's DOJ and our FBI investigation. Not only was that false, but we know that over and over again now we have emails that would suggest that that testimony was false and at best misled the American public, at worst was lying to Congress. And here we are today with emails, text messages that says that even the no coordination message that Director Comey put out on that infamous day in July was actually suggested by the Department of Justice.
Here's the text. Timing looks like hell, Peter Strzok says to Lisa Page, will appear choreographed. All major news networks literally leading with the AG to accept the FBI director's recommendation. Yeah, this is awful. Nothing we can do about it. I mean, this is like a third-rate movie playing out on text messages. These people are supposed to be guarding our secrets and seeking truth and justice. They don't even know how to secure their own texts.
Well, it's interesting that they would go back and forth saying that the timing looks awful, but there's even another email from the Department of Justice that would indicate that on how to articulate the exoneration of Hillary Clinton. And so as we look at that, there's also additional evidence that would suggest that DOJ narrowed the scope of the Hillary investigation to make sure that she was exonerated.
Mark Meadows, thanks for joining us. Keep that staff working because we need to get the facts. Appreciate it.
The abuses at the Obama Justice Department and FBI in front of the FISA court go to the bone of the function of the Justice Department. And the key to this, the key to the lying and the misrepresentations to the FISA court is going to be John Brennan, James Clapper, James Comey, and the senior officials at the Justice Department. When there is a federal grand jury, in addition to the Nunes Committee investigation into the State Department, people will be forced by subpoena to give testimony as senior Department of State officials who are currently there or who have left. I think it will be demonstrated that they colluded with Clinton administration representatives and campaign officials and people like Sidney Blumenthal and Cody Shearer, who passed on completely unreliable information, which they hoped would be passed along to the FBI, and in fact it was, and that information was used fraudulently to obtain FISA warrants. This is why, Lou, the only way to get these answers, once the Nunes committee is done, is to have a federal grand jury force all of these State Department people, CIA, DNI people, FBI, DOJ senior people, under oath in a grand jury. It's the only way we're ever going to get the full story.
And to add another twist, Lou, Rod Rosenstein, the Deputy Attorney General, is a witness. He should be recused from this altogether because he's going to have to testify why he signed a FISA application.
Comey and Strzok and all of those people, including senior Justice Department officials, this was a plot, a brazen plot to exonerate Hillary Clinton in the email server case, to ensure that she became president. And if by chance she lost, part of the plot was to frame Donald Trump with a false crime. And that's why the Steele dossier was used. It was designed to create a false narrative about Trump and his people and to be used ultimately against them if Hillary Clinton lost. This is why this is the single most important scandal of the last 50 years, because senior DOJ and FBI officials engaged in conduct that was designed to corrupt an American presidential election. It wasn't the Russians who corrupted the presidential election. It was the American officials at the Department of Justice and the FBI.
I think we have ample facts revealed to us during this last year and a half that high-ranking people throughout the government, not just the FBI, high-ranking people had a plot to not have Hillary Clinton, indicted so that she could remain the flawed candidate that she was, which in my view was stupidity. And they also had and even this Strzok guy talked about this. They had a backup plan to basically frame Donald Trump. Right. And that's what's been going on. This whole thing, in my view, is just total phony. I mean, how would you feel, someone out there in America land, if somebody was just had a phony scheme about you and went on for months and months and months? Yeah, and that's what's going on.
We're going to discover that the Attorney General, Loretta Lynch, her deputy, Sally Yates, the head of the National Security Division, John Carlin, Bruce Orr, and other senior DOJ officials and, regrettably, line attorneys, people who were senior career civil servants, violated the law, perhaps committed crimes, and covered up crimes by a presidential candidate. But more than that, they tried to frame an incoming president with a false Russian conspiracy that never existed, and they knew it, and they plotted to ruin him as a candidate and then destroy him as a president. That's why this is important. That's why connecting the dots is important, because the FBI now has to be completely reconstructed from the ground up. The men and women at the Bureau are great people. That's not who we're talking about. We never have been. We are talking about people like James Comey, McCabe, Strzok, Page, Baker, Prystep, who was a name nobody knows. He's the head of the Counterintelligence Division, and he was the one who was involved in planning this entire crazy thing involving Fusion GPS, the false dossier, and creating evidence. This is what people have to understand. What the Bureau did was, by working with Fusion GPS and giving contractors access to highly classified information which they had no legal right to see, they needed to create something they could give to the court, the Foreign Intelligence Court, so that they could get wiretaps and surveillance taps and email taps and phone taps on the Trump people, so that if there was anything, they could find it out. Of course, there was nothing. There never was anything. And they created false facts so that they could get surveillance warrants. Those are all crimes. Every single one of those acts constitutes a crime because it was done not for a legitimate law enforcement reason, not for national security reasons, but to create a false case against a candidate, Donald Trump, a president-elect, Donald Trump, and a president, Donald Trump. The FISA court opinion of April 27th of 2017 outlines a series of illegal disclosures to contractors. It is believed that among those contractors were Fusion GPS and CrowdStrike. CrowdStrike is the company that was used to bleach Hillary's computer. CrowdStrike, if what is being reported is true, and I've seen 2 reports about CrowdStrike being among the private contractors that were given access to raw 702 incidental collection of American citizens under FISA warrants. If that is true, they have committed crimes. The Bureau who gave them information committed crimes. There is huge civil liability for CrowdStrike and for the FBI officials. And there is, right now, there's at least 2 lawsuits pending against Mr. Steele, the former MI6 agent who wrote the Steele dossier at the payment of Fusion GPS. Fusion GPS has been sued. I expect if these facts come out from the FISA court showing that these contractors got this information, they will all be sued. Now, they may declare bankruptcy and not be able to pay, but the people don't realize that this is already on the public record, that these things happen. The question which has been blanked out from this opinion, as you can see, this is all dark, all through the opinion. What they've done is they've blanked out the names of the contractors and the names of the FBI and DOJ officials who broke the law. That is going to come out. That's what Nunes has. He has all that information now. He knows what's in these blanks that the court blanked out. The court did the right thing. It's not supposed to reveal that. But once you start doing oversight, constitutional oversight, those blanks go away to Congress. And we will know shortly who the private contractors were that were allowed to break the law by the FBI. This is as bad as it gets. When you have the government, the FBI and the DOJ being absolutely corrupted because of their motivations, and when you have the journalistic community being bought, it seems to me that's pretty bad for all the institutions involved. And journalism is now below Congress in terms of approval ratings. This is not going to help them. What's fascinating to me is how the people who want to defend everything that the Bureau has done or the Department of Justice or the Clintons have turned to a series of narratives to replace the truth. For example, once this whole thing broke, when President Trump said, "I was spied on by the President of the United States," he was laughed at. In fact, he was spied on by the President of the United States, by Barack Obama, under Barack Obama's orders, and under the orders of John Brennan, and Clapper, the Director of National Intelligence, and Susan Rice, the National Security Advisor, and Ben Rhodes, the Deputy National Security Advisor. Because what they did, which was part of a scheme which began in the year 2016, was to try to figure out a way to help Hillary Clinton get elected by exonerating her in her email scandal in her private server in New York, and then she would be elected, and then the problem of Donald Trump would go away. The problem was she lost. And when she lost, they had time between the election in November of 2016 and the time between the president was inaugurated to try and do damage, to cover up what they had done with Fusion GPS and a bunch of other people before the election, and to make it perfect after the election, to secure the storyline. And so, interestingly enough, people, there are some real heroes in this story. And part of it is how you defeat these competing narratives. You'll recall that first there's the story about the dossier, the so-called Fusion GPS dossier, which we now know was developed with the assistance of the FBI, Christopher Steele, the former spy from England, Bruce Orr, a senior Justice Department official in the Obama administration, Bruce Orr's wife, who was an employee of Fusion GPS and a Russian expert. That all of a sudden became something that people got worried about on the Democratic side and on the protect the Clinton side. Then all of a sudden, when the the dossier got even stronger and stronger as a result of the knowledge about Bruce Orr's involvement. The dialogue shifted. And then it became that the dossier really wasn't important because George Papadopoulos, this know-nothing young guy who had been an end-of-the-room foreign policy advisor, was the real guy who got the investigation into the president's collusion with the Russians started as a result of a drunken blathering in a bar to the Australian ambassador, who then told MI6 in London. These narratives have developed because the facts are now so strong that there was a brazen plot to exonerate Hillary Clinton, and then if she lost, frame the President of the United States with a false crime, that this is what they have been forced to do. One of the heroes in this entire story is Admiral Mike Rogers, the head of the National Security Agency. He became the head of the National Security Agency in 2014. In 2015, one of the auditors at the National Security Agency, our electronic surveillance SIGINT masterpiece from World War II, came to him and said, there's some funny things going on at the FBI with regard to 702, which of course is that part of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, which allows the scooping up of huge amounts of phone call data and emails and electronic data about foreigners. And in the course of that, allows the incidental collection of information about Americans, which is supposed to be kept secret, but wasn't in this case because of the conduct of the FBI and the Obama administration Justice Department officials. Mike Rogers says, okay, let's do an audit. He does this in March of 2016. This is way in advance of the election. He then discovers, as a result of the audit, that the FBI has been sharing this secret data about Americans with not other government agencies, but private contractors. Some of those contractors apparently work for the Democratic National Committee. Some of them work for Fusion GPS. Mr. Rogers, Admiral Rogers, says, okay, the court, the FISC court, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, has been lied to. They have not been told about this. And things have been told to them which are not true. He said, I'm going to the court. I'm going to tell the court. Rogers goes to the court on his own and informs the court about these problems. Now, prior to him being able to do that, the Justice Department and the FBI learn about what he's done, about the audit and what he's discovered. And so they go to the court first to inform the court that they have discovered these problems with illegal activity. Doesn't make any difference. It's too late. The court now knows what has happened. So he goes to the court, they go to the court, and then in April of 2016, the FISA court issues this 99-page opinion, which I'll bet you didn't even know about until I talked about it this morning. This opinion describes illegal activity by the FBI, illegal activity by contractors, and it calls it the improper disclosure of raw intelligence about Americans to unauthorized individuals. All of those things that the Bureau did and the contractors were crimes. Now, you wouldn't think, this is a public document now. It's been declassified. You have not seen a single story about this in the Washington Post or the New York Times. So, with this in hand, and remember, Rogers knows all about this before the election. So as soon as the election is held, Rogers determines that since there is now a president-elect who has been spied upon, he knows that Trump was the subject of a plot. So Admiral Rogers goes to visit President-elect Trump in New York in November of 2016, on the 17th of November. He's the head of the NSA. He briefs the president. And it is after that briefing, the very next day, that President-elect Trump moves his entire staff out of Trump Tower to Bedminster, New Jersey, where his golf club is, and that's where the transition team stays until Trump Tower is debugged. What Admiral Rogers did was, and this is why the president said that President Obama had wiretapped him. Rogers, on that day, November 17th, briefed the president about the illegal activities which had been reported to the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court earlier in the year. And the president knew what had happened at that point. Now, interestingly enough, when the outgoing administration found that Admiral Rogers had gone to New York, the DNI, the Director of National Intelligence, John Clapper, and John Brennan, the Director of the Central Intelligence Agency, asked President Obama to fire Admiral Rogers. Now, President Obama had many flaws, but he ain't no dummy. And he said, boys, it's too late. I'm not going to fire Admiral Rogers, because if I do, that'll be the only story about my last days in office, so you can forget it. And Rogers is there to this day, and when this story is written, when it's all over, the great hero will not be Robert Mueller, this crazy man that has been made the special counsel. It won't be the people on the Hill, except for Devin Nunes, who is a real hero, who has stood up under the most incredible personal attacks from real sleazeballs like Adam Schiff, this loony congressman from California. And it will be shown that Admiral Rogers saved the day by forcing the senior Justice Department officials to admit that they had done wrong things. Now, there's another fascinating part of this story. In October of 2016, when Admiral Rogers is going to the court and forcing the Justice Department to advise the court that they had submitted false documents, that they, the DOJ, had submitted, unwittingly had submitted false documents, as they say. Admiral Rogers, plans are being made to fire him at that point, which of course never go forward because of what he does by going to New York. All of this has come to a head at that point, and the court is now learning for the first time about this unbelievable activity. For the first time in the history of the FISA court, it has been lied to, and according to the court, systematically and ongoing violations of the law. This is stunning stuff, and it's all because of Admiral Rogers. And that's where we are today. We are now at the point where Nunes has discovered this. He discovered it back in March when he went to the White House, and all of these documents were turned over to him by the incoming National Security Council staff. And so now we'll watch it play out. By the way, in October of 2016, the Assistant Attorney General in charge of the National Security Division at Justice for the Obama administration, and the person who was responsible for signing the pleadings that went to the court, was a fellow named John Carlin. Once this material was submitted to the court in October of 2016, revealing the violations of the law, Carlin resigned and has not been heard from since. No one could figure out why Carlin resigned. And I don't know why he resigned. There was plenty of time left in the administration. He just left. Now, it may have been that you resigned because you don't want to be questioned by the Inspector General, who at that point had already begun an investigation of the FBI and the DOJ senior people based on Admiral Rogers' complaints. So that's another story that's going to play out. Where is John Carlin and what is he doing? The Russian collusion was a complete fabrication of the Democratic National Committee, the Clinton campaign, Fusion GPS, senior DOJ and FBI officials to create a way to dirty up Trump as a candidate and then destroy him as a president. There is literally no evidence whatsoever that has ever been produced of any conspiracy. And let me just say something that I find deeply offensive. The appointment of the special counsel was completely unnecessary. There was no need for a special counsel. I don't know why Rod Rosenstein did it, but he did it. But there was no justification for it. And in fact, in his appointment letter and memorandum about it, he admits there's no crime that's been discovered, but for political reasons, this needs to be investigated. Well, that's just utter nonsense. Look what he's done to an incoming president. Look at what he's done to the country by appointing a special counsel. That should have been handed off to a bunch of senior DOJ officials who were being monitored by a political appointee who would keep them within the legitimate bounds of an investigation. Mueller has not brought one charge involving collusion with Russians. He's never going to bring a charge involving collusion because there was none. The bottom line is this. Mueller and the way he has conducted his investigation is an embarrassment to anyone who's ever been a special counsel, which I was. I was an independent counsel. Hiring all of these partisan Democrats to conduct the investigation, he's not naive. But Bob Mueller's been around too long. You can't be that dumb to not realize how horrible it is to have these people. These people are not biased against the president. They have an animus toward the president. There is a distinct difference. I believe that his entire investigation, Mueller's entire investigation, has been tainted by this animus. There's no way you can have people who have donated to the Clintons, donated to Obama, represented the Clinton Foundation, represented Clinton individuals in criminal investigations, and then have those people who have given to President Trump's opponent investigate President Trump. I don't know what Mueller is thinking of.
Since you're bringing up the Mueller investigation and the apparent focus on investigating Trump's Russian collusion, isn't it interesting that Mueller and Comey and Rosenstein and others were involved in a Russia collusion story for Obama Clinton?
Mueller, first of all, never should have been appointed because there was no need for a special counsel. That's number one. Number two, he never should have been appointed because he knows James Comey. They're personal and professional friends and have been so for many years. Comey is a target of this investigation. He's clearly been involved in activities which could be deemed illegal and criminal. There's no way Mueller can investigate him or anybody else at the senior people that he worked with. And yet, here he is investigating Russian collusion when he presided over, as FBI director, the investigation into Uranium One, which was a clear kickback bribery scheme by the Russians to bribe Bill Clinton as ex-president with speech money, to bribe Hillary Clinton with speech money for her husband and $145 million in contributions to the Clinton Foundation, and to get a result of selling 20% of the uranium supply of the United States to a Russian-controlled company. The notion that Mueller could investigate that, having been a party to the investigation, is ridiculous. But here's the other thing. Mueller, who was FBI director of time, knew about the Uranium One investigation of Russian corruption and bribery. Did he go to tell James Comey or anybody at the Justice Department that this case was under investigation and that they should warn CFIUS, the committee that approves foreign investment? Did he go? And if he went to see somebody in the Justice Department, like, let's say he went to see Eric Holder, and Eric Holder, who sits on CFIUS, says, I don't think that's relevant to the sale of Uranium One. Or did Eric say, okay, fine, I'll let him know? We do not know what CFIUS was told about Uranium One. There have been published reports that they were told nothing about it. And here's the other part of this. If Mueller knew that this was there, why didn't he go to CFIUS on his own and say, I don't know what you're being told, but I'm going to report to you that this is pretty serious stuff and you need to know about it? He didn't do that. Why didn't Mueller do that? And so what we're left with is this nagging sensation that all of a sudden these really great investigators lose all of their skills and nobody talks to anybody about Uranium One. The other thing is this. Everybody always says in defense of Hillary, well, she was only one of 9. There were 9 agencies. But they forget the most important fact of all. It only takes one vote to stop a deal. Hers. And you know what? She was bought. She wasn't going to vote no. She knew about the bribery that was going on. Her husband was involved in it. She could have stopped the Uranium One sale with one vote. That's all it takes in CFIUS. If one member of CFIUS, 1 of 9, says no, it is done. She didn't vote no, and she could have. So the answer to this is, it's not that she was 1 of 9, it's that she was 1 of 9, and she didn't stop it.